second study that we did is titled Decision Analytic Modeling of the 5 Forces in Competitive Strategy, Application in the US Residential Solar PV Industry. Now, by a show of hands, how many people in the room do not know what decision analysis is? Be honest. Okay, how many people do not know what the 5 forces are? Okay, so as expected, so I will go ahead and give you a crash course in 5 forces and DA, and then I will tell you what this whole research is about. So, understanding decision analysis. Decision analysis is simply a method that helps decision makers make decisions under uncertainty. And in every exercise of decision analytic modeling, we have to account for 3 basic elements. One is the decisions that I'm trying to make. And for every decision, I define a list of alternatives. Then the uncertainties that I face. And then for every uncertainty, I define a list of possible future realizations, which I call degrees. And then finally, the decision maker needs to tell me the value that they care about, that I'm trying to maximize or minimize or optimize somehow. And to solve this decision analytic problem, I have to have a probability weighted average over every decision alternative. Now, to demonstrate that, let's go into an example. Suppose that I'm an automaker and I want to launch a new environmentally friendly car. Your decision here is the type of car that you want to produce. So you say, my alternatives are either a hybrid car or an electric car. The uncertainty that I face is the driving habit for my customer. So the automaker may think that the customer will take the car for a short trip with probability of 0.7, or they may take it for a long trip with probability of 0.3. And then I will say, okay, well, the value that I care about is the NPV, the net present value, from this whole line of business. And I have 2 decision alternatives and 2 probability degrees. That's a total of 2 by 2, 4 possible future prospects. And each one of them has a value. Okay? Now, to represent this problem graphically, I always represent decisions in rectangles, uncertainties in bubbles or ovals, and then the value in diameter. Okay, and I say both the decision and the uncertainty are affecting the value. We solve it by simply calculating the probability weighted average for each alternative. So for electric cars, I see that the expected MPV is here 290 million. For hybrid cars, it's about 160 million. I always want to go for the higher MPV in this case, so I should go ahead and pick an electric car. This is how decision analysis works. Now, let's switch gears and talk about the 5 forces. What are the 5 forces? The 5 forces is one of the most famous strategic frameworks for assessing competition in an industry. It was pioneered by Michael Porter at Harvard Business School, the gentleman that you see in the picture. And it basically says that whenever I go and want to assess competition in an industry, I have to take into account and I have to care about 5 important forces that correspond to 5 important players in the industry. And those forces are the bargaining power of my buyers, the bargaining power of my suppliers, the threat of entry, the threat of substitute product and services, as well as rivalry between me and my direct competitors. And the guiding principles for using the 5 forces framework are as follows. Firms always compete for profit. The higher the competitive forces, the lower the profitability in the industry. And because of that, I want the firms to position where the forces are weakest. Now, to add to that, the 5 forces are generalizable across multiple industries. And however, Porter identifies additional 4 factors that he basically look at as being industry specific, not being industry generalizable. And these are government regulations, technology, complements, and growth rate. And then a very good assessment and understanding of the 5 forces and the 4 factors would allow a firm to achieve those 4 strategic objectives. It allows you to assess the overall industry, to position properly in the industry, to predict and exploit your industry change, and finally to reshape your whole industry. Okay, in this talk, I am only going to focus on the first 2 objectives, evaluate the industry and optimally position in the industry. So, this is what the 5 forces are, and this is what DA is. What do we do? What we want to do is to try to explain how we can use decision analysis as a method to enhance the application and the operationalization of the 5 forces in real life. We do so because we want to highlight important attributes of the 5 forces, which are sometimes either ignored or just oversighted in the implementation in real life. And those attributes are as follows. One, the role of uncertainties, where we emphasize that perfect market information about competition is never available for the decision maker. You always have uncertainty. Two is the interdependence between the forces and the factors, where we say the forces should not be analyzed independently because they actually interact. Three is the relation between the competitive forces and the economic performance. So we say, sure, higher forces mean, lower profit margin, but that does not necessarily mean lower profit, and we will see how. And then, fourth, the relationship between the competitive forces and specific firm actions, where we say that the 5 forces as a framework is tightly linked to other frameworks like value chain activities because they are also connected. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, emphasizing the importance of quantification in all of those attributes that I have just described. So, how do we do it specifically? We do it like this. We combine the 5 forces theory with decision analysis as a method, and we use tools such as the Bayesian networks and decision diagrams to be able to finally produce what we call the DAF model, the Decision Analytic 5 Forces model. Now, importantly, let me tell you what the DAF is and what the DAF is not. DAF is a model. It helps decision makers simply analyze uncompetitive or uncertain competitive landscapes. What it is not is that it is not a criticism of the 5 forces theory. It's also not a modification or a replacement or an expansion of the theory. We're only applying that theory. Okay? And the way that we do it is that we take all Porter's 5 forces literature and we translate it into the decision analytic elements. So under the uncertainties bucket, we put all the 5 forces, the industry factors, and the economic parameters. Under the decisions bucket, we model all firm actions. And then under the value bucket, we put the profitability of the industry. And we can model it as a profit ratio or as a total profit. And I will show you how. So let's start with the forces. The first element. Let me show you how we do the DAF modeling. So for the forces, let's start with an example. Again, it's the easiest way to explain this. So let's talk about the bargaining power of buyer. We model the bargaining power of buyers itself as an uncertainty. That's why you see it in a bubble. But then it's really hard for me to go to the decision maker and just tell them, give me a probability distribution over the bargaining power of buyers. To facilitate that probability assessment, we actually condition it on what we call parent drivers. And in this case, we're talking about the price sensitivity of buyers and the buyer switching cost. And every force in the industry has specific drivers that shape that force in that industry. So how does the analysis go? The decision maker first assess the price sensitivity of buyers. They say, I'm going to characterize that in terms of price elasticity of demand being between -3 and -2 or -2 and -1, and then I put a probability distribution over each one. Then we do the same thing for the buyer switching cost. They, for example, define the degrees as say, the buyer switching cost will be a legal penalty above or below $1,000, and then I have a probability distribution over both degrees. Then I say, given those drivers, I now assess the probability distribution over the force. So I tell the decision maker, given that your switching cost is a legal penalty that is greater than $1,000, and given that your price sensitivity is a price elasticity of demand in the range between -3 and -2, what is the probability that your force is high or low? And then we have a probability distribution. And we do the same thing over all other scenarios. Okay? Now, in real life, and then finally the model calculates the overall probability distribution for me for the force, which in this case is 0.68 and 0.32. Now, in real life, the DAF model is more complicated. So in the cases that we actually analyze in the paper, we go more thoroughly than this because we may have drivers, we may have drivers for drivers, and then if you want to assess the force of buyers, it actually looks something like this. You identify all of those drivers that are affecting the force. And then, importantly also, you identify the shared drivers with other forces. So in this case, for example, the buyer switching cost, which we talked about before, is shared with 2 other forces, rivals and new entrants. Okay? And then you do the same thing for all 4 forces, and you end up with something that looks like this. Now, I don't expect you to read the bubbles. I just want to give you an idea about the scale. In this model, we have 88 different drivers. 13 of them are shared. And we do the exact same thing with the factors, but the factors are industry specific, so we cannot really generalize their modeling. Now, the we move now from the from the forces and the factors into the firm actions and the economics, which we also said are important. So let me walk through those very quickly. In terms of the economic uncertainties, the way that we model it is that we say that price and cost and quantity are all uncertainties, and they depend on the forces. Now, quantity is interesting because it depends on the substitutes and growth rate as well as pricing cost. And the way that we model these is the pricing costs are based on the 5 forces literature. It tells me higher forces lead to lower prices and higher costs. So the margins get squeezed. But quantity is modeled on my interpretation of industrial organization because there wasn't enough literature in Porter's 5 forces literature to cover quantity. Then we talk about the economic value, and this is modeled as the profit of the industry. It can be profit ratio, such as return on invested capital, or it can be total profit, such as earnings before tax. Both are, you get it from accounting sheets. And then finally, we model the firm's decisions. And here, I have what I call 2 types of decisions. I distinguish between 2 types of decisions. Value proposition tells me what kind of product do I produce. And then I have value chain, which tells me how I produce the product. And because both decisions influence competition, then they can actually influence any uncertainty in my models, including the 5 forces as well as the economic uncertainties. And based on that decision analytic mapping, we update our thinking about the objectives. So now we say, you know what, there are actually only 2 strategic objectives for strategic positioning and for competitive strategy. You either want to position in the industry or you want to reshape the industry. Positioning in the industry is a short-term objective. Here, the decision maker does not want to change the behavior of industry players. She's only interested in looking what is happening in the industry and positioning where competition is least threatening. And we do it through 3 consecutive steps. We look at the whole industry, then we look at all different segments in the industry, then we look at different firms within different segments of the industry. And then I can do long-term objective, which is reshaping the industry. And here, I actually do want to change the behavior of other industry players. And we do this through 2 additional steps of DAF modeling. And these are, I predict where the industry is going, and then I try to influence that, that change in the industry to my advantage. Now, I know there's a lot in this DAF modeling, so let me walk you through an actual example. Let me show you how you build a real DAF model for an actual case study. And you might find this interesting. The case study was on solar. In 2014, I worked on a case study on the US residential solar PV industry. And the client that I worked with was a major US solar developer. I'm not going to disclose the ID of the company. They were generous enough to allow me to publish all the data. So they were a major solar developer in the US. What we need to understand is that the time framework for the study was between 2014 and 2016. So these guys wanted to assess competition in the next 2 years. And the decision maker, the person who has the final saying over the input into the model, is the director of strategic planning. And what we wanted to do is simply to answer 2 questions. Is this industry attractive? And if so, where should the firm position? And both of these questions are positioning questions, so we can do them by modeling the DAF for objective 1, step 1, and objective 1, step 2. So let's walk through those. This is the step 1 DAF model. I start with the 5 forces as uncertainties. Then I add all of the drivers for the forces. And here to remove clutter, I'm just putting all the drivers in clouds. And then you see the number here is the total number of drivers that we actually assess. Then we add the industry-specific factors. So we have regulations, technology, and growth rate, and the same thing for the number. And for example here, regulations affect both buyers and substitutes. And then we model the economics. In this case study, the company wanted to assess cost in terms of COGS, cost of goods sold. It's an accounting term that they feel very comfortable with. So we said, sure, let's do it. And we had to distinguish between real COGS and effective COGS. Effective COGS takes into account the subsidies that go into the industry, which we also model. Then from there we model the price, and then we model the total system sales in the industry. And then from the system sales, as well as the general capacity of the system, we get the total installed capacity in gigawatts of solar. And then from there, we calculate the earnings before tax, period, which is the total profit. So, what kind of results does this model give me? Oh, by the way, this is something that we call a DAF Bayesian network because we don't have any decisions yet. So here are the results. The first result is over the competitive landscape. I get a probability distribution over the power of each competitive force. So I see the 5 competitive forces and the probability on the x-axis, and the probability for each of them to be high or low. Now, you notice that most of the forces are moderate, with a probability of high being about 0.4, except for rivals. Rivals have a probability of high to be 0.6. So I can immediately make a conclusion that over the next 2 years, rivalry is expected to be a very prominent competitive power, or the most prominent competitive power. Now, here's the interesting thing. If we have done a really good qualitative assessment, I think we would have probably got the same result. So why did we bother with that? We bothered with that because all the results that I'm about to show you are things that you cannot do with a qualitative assessment, but you can do with that. And here they are. First is the economic performance in the industry. The DAF model gives me a probability distribution over important economic parameters. It gives me probability distribution over the cost, price, and quantity. And it allows me to calculate an expected average value. So for example, the expected average cost is 1.2 and expected average price is $3.4 per watt. And based on that, I can calculate an expected EBT. What this tells me is that given everything that the decision maker knows in the coming 2 years about competition, the expected profits in the industry is $4.1 billion per year. Okay? Now, in addition to the economic performance, I can also measure the interdependence between the forces. And we do it through a thought experiment which goes basically like, this. Think about it as the decision maker walks into the industry and they observe with certainty that one of the forces is extremely high or low. How does this change their beliefs about the other 5 forces? And this is what we do here. We want to understand how our beliefs about the force of substitutes is being updated by observing the other 4 forces. So if I observe the force of buyers as being high, the probability over my belief on substitutes increased from 0.4 to 0.7. In plain English, this tells me, over the coming 2 years, witnessing strong buyers will increase the likelihood of witnessing strong substitutes in the industry. We do the same thing with the other 3 forces, and we see immediately that this interdependence in competition is not symmetric. It's not symmetric in magnitude, and it's not symmetric in dimension. So for example, if I see low new entry, that basically will tell me that here, in this case, low new entry will increase the likelihood of strong substitutes over the coming 2 years. And why think about it? If you walk into an industry where you don't see any new entrants, one of the plausible reasons is because that industry has so many substitutes that no one is interested in that industry anymore. Okay, and we can measure that here. Now, I'm gonna start going a little bit faster. We can also measure the economic implications of that interdependence between the forces. So here, what I show you is how the profit change if I observe that any of the forces is high or low. So if I am in a world where the force of where buyers are extremely strong, my profit can drop down to 1.7. And in a world where my buyers are weak, my profit can go up to 5.7, which is a huge range. In real life, what that tells me is that if all the solar firms want to improve the profitability of their industry, they really should be focusing on only these 2 forces. They should be pushing the substitutes away collectively so they can collaborate on that, or they can work individually on having better relationship with their buyers so that they can improve the profit. Now, the last step that we do here is that we add the positioning decisions. So the firm that I was working with wanted to focus on 4 positioning decisions that were important for them. First, they asked, where should we go? Should we sell in urban areas or in rural areas? Then downstream integration. So we downstream integrate and deal with dealers, or should we not sell through dealers? And then the type of customer financing they offer. Their alternatives were either they sell the system directly through a purchase, or they can offer a loan with no upfront lease. They can offer a loan, or they can offer a lease with no upfront payment, or a lease with a full upfront payment. And finally, panel manufacturing. They either insource it, they do it in-house, or they outsource it. And we add the decisions, we have the decisions at the top, and then we see then what decision affects what uncertainty. So this is for regional focus, and then we do the same thing for the other 3 decisions. Let me jump into the results because I'm running out of time. And we call this a DAF decision diagram. Now, here, just if you count all of these alternatives, because of the way that they combine, I can end up with 32 possible positioning strategies, which we call positioning tracks. This DAF model gives me an expected profit for every single one of those 32 possibilities. And they look something like this. I am only now plotting here the combinations that have the highest profit and the lowest profit. I didn't want to plot the whole 32. Immediately you see that there is a trend. The ones with the highest profit, all of them are urban, and all of them are leased. And the one with the lowest profit, all of them are rural, and all of them are direct purchase. So the conclusion then here that in real life, if I assume that this firm is going to invest the same amount of money to launch this business, and their market share is going to be more or less the same regardless of where they position, then their positioning strategy should be as follows. They should operate in urban areas, they should vertically integrate, and they should offer a lease for the solar system. I can generate further insights by looking at how the positioning decisions affect the 5 forces themselves. So what I'm plotting here is the probability of each force being high over the whole range of positioning decisions. And also here I see a trend. I see that those alternatives result in minimum competition, and these alternatives result in maximum competition. So the conclusions are that vertical integration is always good because it reduces your competition. Here it is. It reduces your competition and it increases profit. Now, the upfront lease is the same. It's always good if I offer lease for my customers. And I do have what we call strategic fit between these two, which means that if the firm applies them together, their benefit is even further amplified. Urban, on the other hand, is tricky because it increases competition, but it also increases profit. It does so because, yes, it increases competition, so my profit margin is squeezed, but I have so much sales that the sales will overcompensate for the profit margin and my total profit will still be fine. So this is basically my point from all of this is to show you how now, with all of these positioning alternatives, the firm has a better idea on how to prioritize its positioning strategies over the coming 2 years. So let me conclude. What we talked about today is uncertainty in a competitive energy industry and flexibility in an energy facility or an energy system. I'm not going to conclude by repeating the results which I've already told you. I want to conclude by telling you how this line of research can be moved forward. My research, pending the decision from the 5 guys in the front, is done. But I think that this research can be really moved forward through these opportunities. I want to give you just like one opportunity and one challenge for each one of these lines of research. I think the opportunity in PES is to be able to assess poly generation with renewable energy. The challenge there is that both my input and my output will be flexible and will be variable, and that's a challenging. In DAF, I really think that the opportunity is to making this tool a generic tool that anyone can use to assess competition in an industry. The challenge is that we need to further streamline DAF, and we need to do so either by simplifying the uncertainty assessment in the model itself, or by looking at behavioral challenges for adaptation in real industries and in real life. And with that, I will conclude. This was my contribution to the very complicated energy puzzle, which I hope, hopefully, one day in the future will add some value to the research world. Thanks.
So who would like to go first? And make it really tough.
Yes, please do.
Okay.
Not lacking in clarity, the presentation.
Yeah. Any volunteers? Yeah. Okay.
You mentioned after your first analysis that one of your analyses that the qualitative results could have been obtained and would have been, but do you really believe that, or is it the quantitative that leads to the qualitative insight? And any result that you would have gotten, you could have been able to justify qualitatively after the fact.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. When I mentioned that the results that you could get through a qualitative assessment, no, I think you can get the insights qualitatively. you can, if you basically do a qualitative assessment that says, I want to say every force is dependent on three things, right? And then I put like, 1, 2, 3 based on those things, and I do very, very simple calculations. It gives you some kind of a ranking. So you can conclude the insights from a qualitative assessment. You can say that like, buyers is moderate and like, rivals is really high based on different interpretations. But you can't pin down a number on it. You cannot put a number unless you have a quantitative assessment, unless you go through that probability calculations. But again, I would say, this is my opinion, is that the insights that you get on the forces qualitatively are related to the forces only. They will not give you an insight on the economic performance, and I don't think they're going to give you an insight specifically about the economic performance when you take into account positioning. Then you're really just like calculating all of these uncertainty nodes in your head, which is almost impossible.
So, yeah, please.
Sure, yeah. So you have this giant decision tree with like 80-something drivers. So when I think about what a state of the world is in your model, to me it's like a vector with like 80 different terms or something.
Right.
So how did you manage to actually compress all that information into assigning like, here's a state of the world, here's whether each force is high and low? How did you sort of manage that number of uncertainties?
Right. So part of that, so if you go to the model, part of that is done through how you actually build the Bayesian model. Where did we put it? So let me tell you, it will be clearer if I just show you the, okay, so here it is. So we don't have basically one uncertainty conditioned on 88 uncertainties, because then you're going to have 2 to the power 88, which is impossible number of possible futures. What we do it is that we do it progressively. We say uncertainty A and B will tell me about uncertainty C, and then uncertainty C will tell me about uncertainty D. So we do it successively, and that's why if you ask the decision maker, you ask the decision maker 2 or 3 or 4, maybe up to 8 possible scenarios at the same time, but not more than that. And then the model takes care of how does it do all the probability calculations all the way down progressively until you have it to the force. So at no point you're assessing more than 8 scenarios that you have to assess at the same time, or conditional probabilities at the same time.
So, other questions? Well, I have a question.
Yes.
So this DAF modeling, I'm completely unfamiliar with any of this, so it's very interesting. So do people use it? Like, is this the first of these sort of solar decision,
No, so I think what we did here is that we really combined 2 worlds. People usually in the industry, they do the 5 forces analysis on a whole range of things to get an idea about competition, right? Like this 5 forces have existed since like 1980, right? And firms do it all the time to just like get a feel about how the competition look like. But on the other hand, there are like even consulting firms that specialize in decision analysis only, where you walk in, you say, I'm uncertain about this problem, I want to model it, and then give me an insight about it. What we try to do is to just combine these 2 worlds, where we say, you can do the 5 forces in a decision analytic tool, and this is how we use it.
So that you think is the real innovation, is that combination?
It's exactly, it's that combination. Because the 5 forces give you very interesting insights and they're clear. And the decision analysis also give you insights, but it might not be related to the 5 forces. So why not do both and try to assess competition using the 5 forces theory and the decision analysis method?
So what did the company think? Were they?
Good question. I will try to answer without disclosing the idea of the company. The results that we've predicted are the current trends in the industry overall. I'm not going to comment on whether the results worked for the company itself, but I can tell you that the insights that we got about the overall industry, now that we are in 2016, is exactly what's happening.
I can confirm that, I think.
Okay, any
Other
more
questions?
any more questions? Yeah, another one here. And
For-
this will be the last one, yeah.
For 88 different variables, how do you get the data, and how do you know that the data is accurate? Was it all
Sure.
given by
So
the
all
company,
the
or was it industry data?
That's a very good point. So the data comes into the model from many teams. So for example, say when we are working on, when we were working on uncertainties that has to do with customers, we went and we talked to the sales team, right? And they said, like, this is our understanding about the probability. Or when we were talking about, I don't know, new entry, we went and talked to like, other people. We did the economic modeling, we talked to other people. So there's a lot of teams working on providing you intuition on different type of those drivers. But at the end of the day, all the probabilities are coming from human beings, and all the probabilities are subjective. And I think this is one of the foundations of DA, that there is no such thing as an objective probability. At least that's my understanding of DA. Because probability is always coming from humans, and it's subjective based on your understanding and your belief about the state of the world. So if a company went and did the exact same exercise using the exact same model, they will get different results because their probabilities will be different, because their understanding about the world will be different.
Okay,
I want to see if Facebook have any questions, so
Okay.
just 1 second.
Who's that guy on the lake?
Okay, no questions.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, very good. I think we're ready now for the closed session.
You actually only took about 30 minutes. Really? So we started about, how many minutes late did we start, like 7 or something? So we were somewhere around that, yeah.
Well,